Okay, so let's just jump in, and we can jump in anywhere. Mikey, where would you like us to go?
Yeah, the first thing that popped out at me, the very beginning of the poem, was I think this is the prime example of why you should always read the title before reading a poem, because it just flows.
Right, how so?
So,
So you can talk about what we were talking about before I started recording.
With the double meaning of espousing.
What is that?
And the double meaning of espousing, like we all talked about, was the more archaic term to marry, to espouse someone, and then to just that says to adopt or support a cause, belief, or way of life. But you also mentioned espousing isn't just talking about, spurting out ideas,
right? And
that's exactly what he's doing here. He seems to be spouting out all of these ideas about poetry, about the world, about everything. It all just is combined into one.
Right. Well, and there's, underneath of it, there's a kind of profound political rumble, I think, to this poem, because Schuyler was gay and grew up, especially his kind of young adult years were in the 50s and early 60s, when being openly gay or queer was not really something done. And in a way, the gay sensibility was kind of channeled into a camp relationship with various objects. And the camp relationship with certain objects is an ironic one, but to be able to freely espouse, to freely marry, is something that was not whatsoever available to Schuyler. And then we come at the very end to the SS United States, which is kind of, I don't think there is an SS United States, or maybe there is. But it certainly stands in for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that's in the poem is, except for Quebec, is contained in the United States, right?
It talks about Hannibal and the Romans as well.
Yeah, it does.
So, yeah.
So it goes elsewhere, and it refers to Tudor City, which is a kind of area of apartments in Manhattan, but that also evokes the Tudors and the British royalty. Yeah. So what do you make of this poem? It can't really be read linearly. It can kind of only be read associationally and non-linearly.
Yeah, the first thing that stood out to me was the form. We have something different here than what we've seen previously.
Right.
So he's playing with spacing, sentence spacing, pausing, things like that for some reason. Also, I noticed that there's a point of tension within his poems. It says, "No, it is absolutely forbidden for words to echo the act described or try to." And then he goes on and uses words like bong and tickle. So it again kind of echoes the last poem that we just discussed.
Right.
As far as he has these words that he's using that kind of sound like the word itself.
Right.
But there is some tension in here. There's something that he wants to do with language and something that he doesn't want to do with the language.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Well, what do we make of the discussion of language within this poem? In addition to, because in a way, there's a marriage of word to meaning, or series of letters to meaning, or sound event to a meaning. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I rethought it.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I think maybe what Kelly was saying, there's another tension, a commingling sky brought onto, for me, ideas of, a storm coming on, and then, And it's like we keep coming back to the idea of the wind and the atmosphere coming together. It's got the line marriages of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And then the couple at the end could as easily be like a real couple sitting across from him as it is like the actual wind fronts coming in, because it's not specified.
Right.
And I think there's just like a tension, like a physical tension there, in addition to the tension in language and like what he's doing in the space that he's writing.
Right. Could you read aloud the 5 lines starting with marriages of the atmosphere?
Yeah. Marriages of the atmosphere are worth celebrating, where Tudor City catches the sky or the glass side of a building lit up at night in a fog.
So what's being espoused there?
It's the atmosphere in the building.
Yeah, it's again like where Tudor City catches the sky, or a building is lit up in fog, right? So it's like, so we're back to the visual here, and how the visual field is totally a variant on the changing sky and the changing light and the objects that are, and weather, of the objects that are contained within, and the weather through which we perceive, the light and weather through that allows us to perceive an object, right? And the buildings are big because they project into the atmosphere, into the sky. Yeah, what about the bales of pink cotton? How does that bales of pink cotton candy work? Take us through the event that starts with the bales of pink cotton candy. Are there real bales of pink cotton candy that you can eat?
Of course not.
All right, well, explain that. Like, what is the maneuver? What is Schuyler doing? So it follows this marriages of the atmosphere worth celebrating, and it feels to me like this is yet another marriage of the atmosphere. So, but how so? It's different from the ones that precede it. Like, what does the image begin with?
The simile, or the metaphor for the cherry trees.
Right. But it's not even a metaphor, right?
Is he talking about the sunset?
No, I think he's, like, if we read it, the bales of pink cotton candy in the slanting light are ornamental cherry trees. The greens around them and the browns, the grays, are the park. Micheala, what do you think? Can you explain what's happening? Just line to line.
So.
Okay, Paul.
I think it's just describing like a park, like, and it just says like the trees, like making it like a really surreal image of like these blooming trees in a park.
Right, which look like bales of cotton candy, like literally, not metaphorically, look like this other thing. And the way that a word is two things at once, like we visually perceive the cherry trees in bloom as pink cotton candy, right? And that follow, and so it's kind of the initial misidentification that allows for this whole little image of the park to really pop and become magical. It's like our misperceptions allow us to kind of access another virtual world. Go ahead.
Sure. I was intrigued by the italicized section.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to parse that out. Especially because we were talking about the idea of espousing, the archaic term to marry, of two things to come together. But in this first line of the italicized part, he references touch me nots, which I thought was a really interesting descriptor. And tension in a poem that is about things coming together.
Right.
And I was just hoping we could discuss that and flesh it out a bit more.
Well, does anyone have a feeling? If the touch-me-nots are not in bloom, neither are the chrysanthemums. What's the relationship between things and that?
Well, they're both flowers. Or that's like really surface level, I guess.
Right. Well, neither are the chrysanthemums. So they have a kind. Go ahead, Mikey.
Oh, I don't know. They have kind of a sexual undertone to me. 'Cause
Yeah.
if we're going with the freely espousing, not being able to be married thing, and the touch-me-nots, like people who are not being touched, kind of thing. Then if
That's
these
great.
people can't be, like, why can't everybody? Then everyone shouldn't be able to if some people can.
Right. Or, I mean, an opposite way of flipping that over is also thinking like, well, there are the touch-me-nots and there are the touch-me-not people and the chrysanthemum people, and neither of them are blooming, right? And so, and they're not blooming because it's not their time to bloom, right? So there will be a time for both to bloom, and that's both a political kind of deep supposition, but there's also just the simple, I mean, this is a literal fact. We could say, if the crocuses are not in bloom, neither are the daffodils, right? Like there's a particular time of the year when it's time for these things to flower, and even though they're different species, they're both triggered to do the same thing at the same time. So there's a kind of deep ecological vision in that little phrase about things that are different being profoundly related, right? Does that kind of answer your...
Yeah,
Okay.
it does.
Okay, great. Okay. I don't know. Yeah, what do we make of the sinuous beauty of words like allergy, the tonic resonance of pill, when used in she is a pill? And then it goes on, no, it is absolutely forbidden for words to echo the act described, or try to, except very directly. So he's really focusing on the materiality of the words here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how does that or how do we go from, would somebody just read the words he's supporting? Just read them in sequence. Go ahead.
Bong, tickle, inescapable kiss.
Yeah, great. And kiss is a fascinating word. It has two S's, and it's about multiple things coming together in one spot. And the word is also such a physical word that the event of that word, of this thing as a word, as a material piece of language, has its sound, its visible quality, its meaning, and its kind of resonance and connotation all occurring at once. So it's a very complex espousal.
It's also really interesting that he writes that it's an inescapable kiss.
Right.
So it's an unavoidable joining.
Right.
Titled as freely espousing. So there's a contradiction in there.
Right. Well, in using language, one is caught within the limits of language, too, and that each word is like a kiss between the matter of the word and the meaning of the word. Right? We could think of like words kissing like the word cell phone kissing the cell phone, or remote control kissing the remote control. or table, kissing the table. So, I mean, what's the overall tone of this poem? How would you characterize the poem overall?
It's pretty reflective. There are a number of questions posed throughout, and it's like also like contemplative. Like it's almost like he goes through and like keeps correcting himself. He's like, no, not this, not this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's kind of the overarching tone, which makes sense for freely espousing, where it's like not fully decisive, just kind of a vignette of just like these like random like vignettes of these like random thoughts, sort of. Great. With a kind of an overarching theme.
Right, a theme that starts in the first line of the poem.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well we're gonna wrap this up, and we'll see you in the discussion of Dining Out with Doug and Frank. Okay, signing off.